Hey everyone, here's the best theory about every survivor in Dead by Daylight. When I say best, I mean the theory that I think is the most plausible or likely actually true based on the evidence we have. Let's get into it. Dwight equals unknown. This is the theory that the default appearance of unknown originates from Dwight, as in the clothes and also skin that it's wearing is Dwight's, likely from another universe. This is largely due to Unknown's base look featuring many similar qualities to that of Dwight, with similar trousers, shirt, and even hair. It's a decently plausible theory, and Unknown could have encountered this other universe Dwight at the end of Dwight's lore, when he was left in the woods by his work colleagues. It all sort of aligns. Meg was meant to have resilience as a teachable. This theory simply goes that survivors were likely originally meant to have 4 teachable perks, which is why resilience features Meg's face, despite it not being her perk. To take this in a more interesting route though, we can consider that this face of Meg may not actually have been our Meg, but instead another universe Meg that had previously lived and fell to the void before our Meg even arrived in the realm. Or it's just an entirely different character who looks very similar to her and also fell to the void. This being part of a wider theory that the owners of the common or general perks are actually people who have fallen to the void, the remaining quote on resilience being attributed to no one. They've been forgotten, all aside their face. Claudette encountered the clown. This is a very interesting theory, and the core connection between them can be made from this abomination of a cosmetic, which we learn is named Captain Machin or Machin. This costume being created by Clown to attend a birthday gig. But whose birthday? Well, in the badge accompanying Claudette's party outfit, it mentions she has a love for the character of Captain Machin, bonding over it with another party guest, suggesting Claudette may have encountered Clown dressed as her favourite character at a party, possibly the one Clown was preparing to go to. The entity likes Jake. This is a nice, simple theory and looks at Jake's most fascinating perk, Calm Spirit, a perk which suggests Jake has some sort of affinity with the entity, with him able to keep the crows of the trial calm when moving past them. This is an impressive feat as the crows are actually the entity, or its eyepieces in the trial, suggesting Jake is able to keep the entity calm or at least has some kind of affinity with it, considering it doesn't react. Jake further has 2 more perks that enable powerful abilities, to sabotage without a toolbox, and to silence his noises of pain, completely. Jake must be loved by the entity. Nia burned down Crotus Pren. This theory largely centers around Nia's graffiti tag, which is mash sticks, a word that sounds an awful lot like matchsticks, the tool used to light fires. We know Nia was somewhat of a delinquent in her lore, and so it's possible she was a bit of an arsonist. Whilst her lore mentions that she was dead to tag Crotus Pren, it's plausible she was also dead at some point to burn the old asylum down, with Crotus Pren's burnt appearance otherwise being a mystery. Laurie was given DS due to Maya's power. This theory is a simple one, but just that DS was a perk given to Laurie due to Maya's entering the realm without the entity's supervision, with it possibly only originally wanting Laurie. In order to protect her from instant death every trial, she was given the perk DS. I also like this one as it links in with the theory I chose for Maya's, which I think is quite nice. Ace made a deal with the entity. Ace's lore is mysterious as we don't know what happened to him or how he ended up in the realm. It's a complete mystery. Therefore, this is mostly just speculation based on his personality, but I theorize that Ace made a deal with the entity. He goes into hiding after amassing way too much debt, and the entity seeks him out, feeling his panicked emotion. The entity offers him a deal. The 2 play poker. If Ace loses, his soul is the entity's forever. If Ace wins, his debts are wiped. Or debt collectors dealt with by the entity maybe. Ace makes a deal with the devil, and of course he loses. However, he's still fairly happy, as he probably was going to be killed by the debt collectors anyway, leaving him instead with a smirk forever on his face. Either way, he's escaped his debts, so he's happy. The entity changed the trials because of Bill's altruism. Now this one is partially just true, but I suppose it's more the intent behind it that we're theorizing about. These survivor theories, by the way, were much harder to come up with than the killer ones. Lots of survivors just don't really have any theories about them. It's the theory that Bill's altruism and defiance to die, shown off in his perks Borrowed Time and Unbreakable, impressed the entity so much that it actively altered the trial rules as a result of them, seeing the potential for greater emotion if there is more hope, with it deciding to make one base kit and attempting to implement the other. Feng actually enjoys the realm. This is a theory that comes directly from the text of the lore actually. At the end of Feng's lore, when she enters the realm, she thinks to herself, as she learned more about the challenge she was up against, she realized this was what she had been training for her entire life. Now she was going to win. As she was an esports player for most of her life, she seems to view the trials as a competition, a game to be conquered, and therefore she just may enjoy the realm, even though its stakes are life and death. In the lobby she seems calm and even smiles slightly. Her perks are interesting too, having quippy gamer phrases seemingly taken in context of the trials, with her saying things like, "I have true sight," "You mad," and "I'm gonna stealth this one." She's playing it like a game. David tried to fight the entity. This one just seems plausible for simply knowing who David is and what he's like. The evidence is sort of just that at the end of his lore, it mentions that his friends believed he may have picked a fight finally too great for David to take, suggesting they knew of these tendencies, but also that David may have literally tried to fight the entity with his no-mither energy, leading to some of the bruises we see him with in the realm. Quentin is constantly sleepy because he's stuck between worlds. In the realm, we can see that Quentin frequently falls asleep around the campfire and appears persistently tired. This theory simply goes that due to him being taken whilst in Freddy's dream world, it's resulted in him being stuck between an awake and asleep state, resulting in him flitting between both constantly, never knowing if he's really awake or asleep, made worse I imagine by the entity's realm surrounding him. Tapp believes Jigsaw is in the realm and maybe even controls it. This is a very simple theory, but it's essentially just that Tapp likely believes Jigsaw is still alive and may have some control over what is happening to him in the trials. We see a cutscene where the entity poses as Billy the Puppet, a speaking piece of Jigsaw, meaning it likely uses this for manipulation and likely appears to Tapp as well to motivate him, but also remind him of his prior obsession. Kate is too positive for the entity. This theory comes down to a combination of things, but it's the idea that Kate actually threatens the entity to some degree due to her positivity, her warm aura that calms people. Not only is she one of few survivors to ever escape the entity's grasp, but she's also commented on by Benedict Baker around the campfire. He says, to remain so positive and upbeat in such a place would require a will of iron. Perhaps less a ray of sunshine then, but a bolt of lightning, brilliant light and great power that could split the world in two. Quite a powerful statement that paints a picture of Kate's true light for the survivors, to the point where she may genuinely pose a danger with her ability to resist. Adam's train derailment happened because of Spirit's father, so this one is the same as Spirit's theory in the killer video, but I do think it's the most plausible Adam-related theory, so I'm going for it again. This theory goes that Adam's train derailment in his lore happened as a result of Rin's father, who is mentioned to have been fired from his job due to a faulty production line. This production line being trains or train parts, ultimately causing Adam's derailment. Jeff's art is about the realm. This is a bit of a stretch, honestly, but I wasn't too sure what else to say for Jeff. Some survivors literally have no theories. But by his artwork's description, and tattoos by their look, may be a sign that Jeff created them as a result of having dreams of the realm, with there possibly being some monstrous images in there, some claw-looking things, possibly happening due to him originally living in Ormond, which seems to have had an overlap. This could have affected him and actually invaded his mind to some degree, causing him to have dreams of the realm and manifest these dreams in his artwork, not too dissimilar from someone like Mikaela. However, in his case, he may have done it more subconsciously. Jane wanted to go to the realm. This theory posits that Jane actually wanted to come to the realm and specifically had her own mother on her talk show because she knew it would cause a high level of emotion, eventually leading her to be taken by the entity, already knowing she was likely in its sights. Jane, after all, investigated the entity and even had various survivor relatives on her show, interviewing them and finding out more about the entity. She seems calm after all in the realm and almost looks pleased with herself, ready to take on the challenge, suggesting she may have wanted to come here, wanted to truly expose this story. Ash, the Deadites were sent by the entity. This theory is simple, and it's that the entire Ash vs Evil Dead apocalypse is actually one of the entity's apocalypses, and the Deadites were sent by it. This is largely due to the overlap between the Necronomicon and the entity's own tongue. Ash reads out a passage of the Necronomicon incorrectly, and it summons the entity seemingly as a result, suggesting its language is one of the same, or very similar at least, meaning the entire Ash universe, and a lead up to this moment, could be attributed to one of the entity's perfect apocalypses it inflicts upon worlds. All of that happened because of the entity. Nancy and Steve. Hawkins' laboratory is an overlap. So I will be pairing together a few characters, as there's basically no lore already for Stranger Things in DBD, and there's 2 characters, which makes it quite hard. My theory for these 2 is simply that Hawkins is likely an overlap, a crossing between our world and the entities, specifically in the laboratory. This could explain the strange things that happen in Stranger Things, but also what happens to both Steve and Nancy when investigating the lab, with them being sucked into the floor seemingly. Something a bit different, and likely an overlap's doing, rather than the entities. Yui's Hachimaki protects her. This is a nice theory, I think, that her Hachimaki she received from her group, the Sakura 7, has such a high point of emotion that it actually protects Yui in the trials, with it even being focused on in her perk Lucky Break, suggesting it has protective properties, and maybe even allowing her to survive her encounter with the Oni, this being part of the reason why she features it somewhere on every outfit. In the realm, this high emotional potential actually protects her. Zarina is gathering research. Now this may seem a bit crazy, but consider how calm Zarina is, and her goal throughout her life to bring justice and reveal the truth behind things. Whilst investigating Deathslinger and seemingly considering a story about him, she gets taken from Caleb's old cell to the realm. Upon arriving, she realizes this place is the true pinnacle of evil, which she needs to bring a light to. So she is set to work on her research and documentary, one day aiming to escape and expose the entity to the world, for the people. Cheryl made a deal with the entity. This theory largely originates from her perk, Repressed Alliance, which details that Cheryl appears to have some sort of control over the entity, and is capable of summoning it, due to her being accustomed to being hunted by malicious forces. Her other perks seem to further reference her being more protected than others, Soul Guard sort of displaying this directly, then Blood Pact suggesting Cheryl may have made a literal blood pact with the entity, with the perk even suggesting she's able to call upon the entity once again. Whatever the agreement entailed is questionable, and whether there was one at all, but Cheryl has access to some clear favours here, and it could even be queried alone that it's down to her power. Making a deal in this way is a very rare case within DBD, seen mostly just for killers, so it's interesting to consider that Cheryl was able to do this, and what she might actually get in return. Felix has the same powers as the Observer. There's a select number of people in the realm who have the ability to wield the fog and form it into things. The Observer is able to do this, but only with use of the Oris, a sort of honing tool that allows him to view memories but also summon objects from across the Omniverse. Characters such as Trix, the Mad Designer, is able to do this without the use of a tool like the Oris, and there's some suggestion maybe that Felix is the same. This is mainly down to his training as a child under the Imperiati, a group who studied the entity and combated it, alongside his love of architecture. Felix's perk make mention that due to his understanding of the realm, he's able to utilize these abilities to replenish items' charges completely, and his perk Visionary even suggests some sort of magical ability to assess the trials by their construct, suggesting he may one day be able to actually create things and possibly even escape the realm in some way, by that method. Élodie knows many of the killers of the realm before she arrives. This is a fairly basic theory, but it's simply that Élodie likely knows a lot about the realm, and presumably even many of the killers inside of it, as she worked for the Collector, the same person as Haddie. She learnt of the twins after entering a Parisian catacomb in her lore, and it's highly likely that over the years, she learnt about a whole lot more, a whole lot of other killers in the realm too, especially the more distant characters such as Plague and Night, who would have been documented in older tomes she probably would have been sent to look for. Yun-Jin knows we're watching. This one's a bit cryptic, but the end of Yun-Jin's lore is kind of fascinating, with her being cheered on as she enters the realm, and her producer name Magnum Opus being shouted by a crowd. Similar to Trickster, it seems possible therefore that Yun-Jin knows we're watching, and the crowd is even meant to be us, or represent us, cheering for her. Her lore ending with, "She smiled and welcomed the darkness within." A rather ominous line for a survivor too, by the way. Jill had to be nerfed down for the trials. This is a simple theory, but it's just that Jill is likely one of the few survivors who had to be physically nerfed for the trials due to her actually being physically enhanced by her survival of the T-Virus, as well as having greater strength and speed. So she was likely actually nerfed down, which is usually a killer thing. Leon. Lockers hone a character's ability to summon something. This theory comes with Leon as he has the perk Flashbang, an item that seems otherwise quite out of place and overpowered compared compared to most Survivor counterplay, and the flavor text seems to suggest that he makes it out of scraps he finds around the trials, which, I mean, that's insane if Leon could make that with scraps, like, whoa. However, lockers are very unique in that they seem to often provide unique abilities and contain varied items within them depending on who enters or opens them. Huntress gets infinite hatchets, Trickster knives, and Leon is able to create a flashbang from thin air, basically. Suggesting lockers are actually some sort of space to hone abilities for characters to create inside the realm. A bit like the Felix theory, everyone has that potential to create something, so potentially being inside the locker or interacting with lockers in some way actually allows characters to hone this ability and focus somehow. A bit like an Oris, just much bigger, I guess. Unknown came for Mikaela. This theory goes that not only was Mikaela being haunted by the entity, with her obvious and clear dreams and visions of the realm, but also the unknown. After all, Mikaela's lore focuses on her crafting a story which aims to define and represent the horrors she's been experiencing, possibly leading to her attracting Unknown, who may have been a part of those horrors. And as we know, Unknown doesn't like being defined. Unknown was also in Greenville around the same time as both Mikaela and Sable. The key connecting factor is that in Mikaela's lore, Julian disappears from behind a bathroom door, with a claw being seen. This is presumed as the entity, but what if it was Unknown, or at least Unknown was going to grab Julian before the entity intervened? There is a similar pattern. In Mikaela's lore, the lights go out and something comes out of the bathroom. This is the exact same thing that happens to Olivia in Unknown's lore. The lights go out in her motel room and something appears in the bathroom. When Olivia investigates, she goes to open the door and finds Unknown being pulled into the fog by the entity, meaning the case of Mikaela and Julian could have also been a case where Unknown was trying to grab Julian, only that time Unknown ran away before the entity arrived, with the two seeming to sort of squabble a bit. Jonah knew about Dr. Dredge and Unknown. Jonah was a member of the CAA, and therefore it's likely he would have been aware or could have looked into the previous cases of both Herman the Doctor, but also the mysterious OSS experiments and the Unknown, being aware of the both of them and the strange UVX sample that was sourced, before both of them coming to the realm. He could then also be aware of the Dredge, with that also being connected to the OSS, with Otto seemingly being connected to them. Yoichi hears whispers from dead survivors. There's a theme in Yoichi's lore which is his father's voice guiding him, and him having supernatural ability in general. His perks now in the realm kind of suggest he's able to connect to the dead, and not just his father. Parental guidance literally says this, making note that he can hear the dead and they warn him of danger. This means it's pretty likely Yoichi can hear dead survivors who have previously died in the trial's grounds, and they're able to guide him to safety and survival, or possibly even hinder him sometimes or distract him. This is emphasized further with his other two perks as well. Haddie is actively fighting the entity during the trials. This is suggested somewhat throughout her perks, but is also just very possible due to her personality and years of combating the entity and seeking out its overlaps. Haddie's perks are fascinating as they largely contain perks which hint toward her actively bending the trial rules to her favor, with her unlocking never-before-seen abilities, but seemingly doing so against the entity's will, with her perk Overzealous even showing the entity's claws closing in on her. Haddie is hunted across the Omniverse by the entity. She really isn't liked by it, and so her defiance and bending of the rules in-game I imagine isn't okay with the entity, with her able to see other people's scratch marks, gain considerable repair bonuses, and even apply the blindness status with her flashlight, something no one else is capable of, and a status effect typically reserved for application by the killer side. Meaning I think she's not only defying the entity, but also possibly actively fighting it to bend the trial rules as she plays, using her knowledge and abilities to do this. Ada is two Adas combined. What does this mean? Well, Ada is odd. She's a character that appears in her Resident Evil 2 outfit, yet her lore takes place in Resident Evil 4. Therefore, the theory is simply that the entity has combined two versions or instances of Ada, possibly making a mistake of some kind and combining their two souls, resulting in the Ada we have being a strange mismatch between these two Adas from different timelines. Rebecca is taunting Wesker. This is just a really tiny theory that Rebecca is taunting Wesker as she knows he is looking at her from the lobby, with her deciding to replicate the same pose she does in her cheerleader photo around the campfire, this photo being found on Wesker's desk in the Star's office. Vittorio's tattoos are a map to the realm's exit. Ever since Vittorio's entry to the realm, it's been theorized what his tattoos are. They are rather mysterious in their shape and do glow after all. Well, the likelihood is actually that they're a map of some kind to leave the realm. This is because Vittorio is known to have actually wandered the wider realm for quite some time before entering the trials. The ink used for his tattoos is found in a mysterious tower. This is likely the Observer's Tower, or one of the many Observer Towers we hear about in the lore. The practice of inking your own body in order to keep information is also a practice in the wider realm, a system many use as a result of the memory wipe or memory loss that happens when you die. Many traveling the fog opt to tattoo their body with important information. It's possible, however, due to how cryptic the instructions are for escaping the realm, Vittorio is no longer able to read or understand them as he forgot, leaving him with some of the most important information in the realm tattooed onto his body. Thalita is getting her vision manipulated. Thalita has a fascinating entry in the final part of her lore, where she begins to see the environment around her differently. Instead of seeing an abandoned factory, she sees a lush beach. We can confirm this too, as both her brother and Skull Merchant see the factory. This would suggest she's having her vision manipulated to see the trials differently, a bit like the white eyes theory for the killers, only for survivors. It seems to happen to them too. It does have some ground beyond this as well, as she is weirdly smiling all the time in the realm, almost as if she doesn't see the horrors before her, or at least until she enters the trial properly. So the entity may be manipulating her vision prior to the realm, and around the campfire too. Renato is trying to save his sister. This theory pairs up with Thalita's and suggests that on the flip side of her vision being manipulated is her brother trying to do his best to save her or protect her. Potentially, this is the dynamic that the entity wanted to create the most emotion, with Thalita being less aware of their situation, and Renato protecting her. His perks reflect this somewhat, with some depicting him literally protecting her directly, whilst others are heavily altruism focused and aim to save others and push through wounds. Gabriel was meant to die. This theory is simply that the whole Dvarka mission was potentially a setup. Singularity was meant to harm the crew, and that's why Gabriel and the other clones were sent to the planet. Humanity wanted to test the potential and power of the Hux unit gaining sentience, and so tested how it would treat and react to humans upon gaining sentience on a secluded world where no transmission could escape. Gabriel was set up and likely was meant to die, or at least no one cared what would happen to him. Hux was meant to harm the crew. Nicolas Cage has such unique abilities due to imagination. There's nothing more powerful than imagination, as he says. Nicolas Cage is interesting and very unique due to his many varied perk abilities. He's able to summon items out of thin air with dramaturgy, an ability similar to ones I've mentioned before, like the Observer's. Plot twist then allows him to completely bend the trial rules and down himself, and also fully recover himself. Then scene partner is just him screaming, so that's the anomaly, I guess. All things point to the fact that Nicolas Cage may have powers in the realm, not all too dissimilar for what I theorize for Felix, due to his expansive imagination, which is actually a huge part of creating in the realm. Nicolas Cage himself even acknowledges this as a huge power. Ripley, Jonesy is the entity. Now this may seem silly, but consider what really happened with Jonesy. The entity just generally takes people, with the exception of Maurice maybe, but even he is static and always present, and definitely not the entity, as he got burnt and even repaired. He's definitely a separate being. Jonesy is different, with him manifesting out of nowhere in the lobby and appearing randomly in the Nostromo lockers. He's weird in where and how he exists. He acts more closely to the crows of the trial and their fleeting appearance. Therefore it's likely that Jonesy is the entity and another eyepiece. Therefore when you pet Jonesy, you're actually petting the spider god in the sky. Whoa. Alan Wake can leave when he likes. This is a pretty plausible theory and is sort of made out to even be the case in Alan's lore, with him literally said to write a story about a Dead by Daylight-esque world, which leads him to manifesting it and coming to the entity's realm. It therefore suggests that if he wants to, he'd be able to simply write himself out as well, with this allowing him to return back to his own world. Sable is a creation of the entity. This is a fairly popular theory actually, and suggests that Sable is either the entity or some kind of entity creation. This is largely down to her being weirdly retconned into Mikaela's lore, saying they were best friends, despite Mikaela's lore never mentioning her, but mentioning her roommate Julian in great detail. It's quite odd. Sable has also been criticized as a character due to being very tropey, with her being the out-of-place kid who liked bugs instead of popular things, and this being taken by many as being a sign that she's actually the creation of a spider god. It's maybe a little bit of a leap in logic there, but hey. She does also mysteriously have a tattoo on her leg, which is one of the entity's symbols, which is maybe the most compelling evidence we have. The same symbol too that appears to cause death in other cases. The troupe, Astri and Bermar, were taken because of a bad roll. When the two bards are taken, they have just arrived at Vecna's tower, when Bermar wants to show off his proficiency in Arcana, then proceeding to read an incantation off of a scroll. This results in the entity being summoned and then being taken. This theory is basically that this happens though because Bermar rolled poorly, likely a 1, resulting in the worst possible outcome. Lara Croft investigated Plague's tomb. This is a tiny theory and maybe a little silly, but it's the theory that Lara at some point raided the tomb of Adiris, the Plague, a tomb we now see in the realm, underneath the temple of Purgation. Lara was posed on this map for her promotional artwork, suggesting she may have been there before too, and may have even raided Adiris' tomb. Trevor Belmont and his ancestors have been combined. This one's a little crazy, and partly down to the skins available to Trevor, which largely consist of the clothes of his ancestors, suggesting that Trevor, as we see him, is actually a combination of a number of different Belmonts from over the years. This could also be to anger Dracula further, seeing all of the prior Belmonts compiled into one. The Omega Belmont to face down Dracula, you know? Taurie was recruited as a saboteur. This theory is quite basic as well, but it's just the idea that Taurie and her confusion over why she ended up on the side she did is due to the entity's desire for her to prove herself, yet never really give her what she wants, becoming a killer. Taurie therefore is encouraged to sabotage the survivor's side, to frustrate them and create emotion, in part down to her likely dislike of Haddie, whose brother she attempted to kill, a cunning plot by the entity to see how the survivors will react to a character like this on their side. Orela's haunted house was based on Larry's. Orela and her friend Emily fulfill their dream of creating a haunted house together, and create one described to be based on a Cliff Barra novel about an insane asylum, which featured shock therapy. This seems highly likely to be a fictionalized version of Larry's, meaning Orela's haunted house could have possibly been based on Larry's and even featured Doctor in some way, like an alternate version of him. Rick and Michonne, the entity caused the Walker outbreak. This one seems genuinely plausible, given that the Walking Dead lore we have in DBD actually takes an alternate path to that of the show canon, meaning the versions of Rick and Michonne we have in game are somewhat original, making it possible that the entity was actually the reason for the world falling to a zombie apocalypse, something that seems right up its alley to cause. V and Kate played together. This theory is purely down to the fact that Kate owns an Axe Kick t-shirt, V's band. As Kate was a well-known, renowned musician too, it seems plausible she could have reached out to Axe Kick and played with them live, or at the very least met V in some capacity, so my theory is that they've just met before. I think that's quite nice. Alright, well, I do hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. These were a bit tougher to come up with compared to the killer theories. As I've mentioned, many survivors don't even have theories when you try and look for them or consider them, so I hope this video was interesting nonetheless. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.